Hi, everybody. Do you know what? I'm so glad Kaylin's here because she's described the basics of the language and how you can use it, which means I don't have to and show up my ignorance. So thank God for that. So I've put this in especially for Bill because he tells me I don't put what I do in my slides because I'm a little bit bashful. So for once, Bill, here you are. And you've got a nice picture of me drunk on a London street. I'm Chris Wood. I'm Principal Architect at Ozone API. I'll talk more about that in a minute. I'm also a writer at Nordic API's blog. I've been on the blog. It's 10 years next year. So I've been blogging for Nordic APIs for a good old time. And I work with the Outreach Committee at the OpenAPI initiative. The Outreach Committee, for anybody that doesn't know, is the kind of marketing arm, I guess is the best way of describing it, of the OpenAPI initiative. So we try and focus on providing content that people can learn about OpenAPI, how it works, what it does, publicize its successes. We write newsletters, do previews and profiles of people in the community. I am going to make a shameless plug at this point and just go to Chrome quickly. We have a brand new course out called OpenAPI Fundamentals. We created this to give everybody a level playing field in terms of how you understand OpenAPI, what the construct does. It doesn't go into any detail, but it starts breaking down the language, where it came from, why it exists, what it does, and then we build up into design first, code first approaches, the pros and cons of each, and finally look at how tooling uses it. If you want to go and take it, it's free, doesn't cost you anything, which is marvelous. So yeah, go and check it out. So, shameless plug over. So, why am I talking about Typespec? Well, my colleagues are getting a bit fed up with me mentioning this word along with every other buzzword that exists in technology. But the reason I'm interested in Typespec is because I went to the Austin Summit. I listened to Gareth Jones and another speaker talk about Typespec, what it does, how it works. That graph I saw in Austin, and it really resonated with me. I then did 2 articles on the Nordic API blog covering those, and I thought, this is for me. This is something that helps reduce, and I'll use Gareth Jones's terms, cognitive load in terms of doing API design. Because actually, looking at a massive JSON or YAML file and then understanding all the operations in its native format is kind of tricky. It's great for machine readability. For me as a human being with only a portion of my brain thinking about that specific aspect of the API, it's nice to break it down a bit. So I started a new job in May. I wanted to impress everybody inside the organization with my wonderful knowledge about APIs, and I thought Typespec, there's the thing that I will impress them with. So essentially I've dived into it ever since. This is not an abstract thought or just messing around, because I work for a company called Ozone API. Ozone API does 2 things. They help countries and markets build open finance standards. So, you know, we're essentially consultancy business with experts who built the UK open banking standards, contributed to the SAMA standards in Saudi Arabia. We contribute to FDX. We contribute to a different bunch of standards. So we've got a very vested interest in the quality of those standards and how they're manufactured. The other thing we do is we provide technology for businesses, that, especially banks, who need to comply with open banking regulations, open finance regulations in a lot of different territories. So having that view on standards that's as simple as it possibly can be, because we both build them and we deliver software based on them, is a really, really important thing for us. So before we start on why Typespec is important in this space and why we're diving into it, I will just do the briefest open finance standards overview ever, just to set the playing field. So I nicked this from Deloitte. They're a consultancy, massive consultancy. They clearly know what they're talking about, so I trust them. So on the left, before the time of open banking and open finance, we had closed banking, where a customer had a relationship with a bank, and everything that was related to that customer and about their account was in a closed loop between the bank and the customer. So their account history, the ability to make a payment, what the current balance was, what FX trade they might want to do, so on and so forth. That's what closed banking was, closed banking. Right, open banking, on the right-hand side, is removing that tightly coupled relationship between the bank and the customer and turning that into something that a very important person can take part in, the third-party provider, or TPP, if you've been going through PSD2 for the last 3 years. It's essentially, this allows new protagonists to come into the market who can provide services on behalf of the customer that the bank doesn't necessarily want to provide or cannot provide. So personal financial management across all your accounts, for example, sweeping your savings from one bank to another, for example. Those are the kind of the classic use cases for open banking. And you know, there's a lot of people in the market who say, oh, open banking's failed, open banking, load of rubbish, whatever. It's the start of a journey towards an ecosystem that will take time to foster and grow. So don't write it off just yet, because there's a lot happening in the open finance space. It depends on what country you're in, the viewpoints of the regulator, the viewpoints of the protagonists in the market. There is still a very burgeoning open banking and open finance development going on. So I said I'd try and be quick. That's about as quick as I can make it. But the thing is, open banking, open finance relies on APIs at its heart. The original model for the Open Bank project was based on APIs. That's where the term open banking came from, was the Open Bank project. Open banking does not, and open finance do not exist without APIs. They're fundamental to how the ecosystem works. They provide things that I've put down here. Equality, everybody delivers the same API. Therefore, we get some sort of interoperability in the ecosystem. And then third-party providers then have a known quantity in terms of the APIs they interact with. So standards is at the heart of that, creating standardized APIs as the baseline for the open finance ecosystem. So the real meat of this is, why is Typespec a good fit here? And this is where my opinions and my analysis and all the other stuff I've been doing over the last 6 months comes in. Well, the first thing is the package structure. So Kaylin pointed out that we can package things up into separate projects and reuse them. That's actually quite important when you're both providing standards and consuming standards from markets that you want to turn into runtime code. So having a package structure that can help describe the interfaces, that reduces cognitive load and makes it easier for us to design our platform, is a really good thing. You know, we get away from taking the OpenAPI documents and just using them through some conversion process from a tooling maker into having standardized models. And I'll touch on one aspect of one of the last things Kaylin said a bit later on. There's also a degree of separation. So this is my friend Gav, who I've worked with at various places over the last 10 years. So he's a standards author like me. Me and him work on the technical API design we worked in open banking in the UK. We're now working in the UAE on their standards. Essentially, Gav and I, we bump into each other all the time. When you're a standards author, you're essentially creating the template for implementation of an API across the market. The tooling system for that kind of design is actually quite small. We've tried various different things. We've tried using JSON references with OpenAPI in order to make it work for us, because it's quite design focused. It's definitely, if you want to find something that's design first, this is design first. For us, as standards authors, there's no implementation. We don't write software. You know, we're looking at the best way of standardizing both the API operations and the request and response payloads that sit underneath them. Therefore, for us, it's really important to be able to do things productively in a way that makes sense to us, reduces cognitive load. I think that's really, really important thing about Typespec, so that it's actually easier for us to understand what we've created and understand what each other's created, because we're always reviewing each other's work, and allow us to work with a degree of separation. So I can be working on a given operation in my branch and Gav's working on something else, and we're not both just trying to update the same YAML file at the same time. So that package structure actually is really good for productivity, but it also gives us that degree of separation from each other, which is more like a traditional programming language. It also makes reuse easier. Now, you may be hearing me say this and say, well, reusability is easy in OpenAPI, and yes, it is. Obviously, using a reference object in order to point to something that describes a something, and in this case, my old friend active or historic currency in amount is that something. It's easy to point to that thing, but actually having one version of the truth when you're working in lots of separate YAML files is hard, and without the without a tool chain that really works for us in that space, we've not struggled, but we've done a lot of copy and pasting. So actually, it makes sense for us to not stop copy and pasting and put this in Typespec, and that's then the seed for how we do reuse. So all that's kind of the high level. This is where I think that Typespec's really helping us. The first thing is it helps us simplify the standards. I've kind of pointed to this already. In the standards we're building, if you look down the left-hand side, this is our Typespec model, and I don't think there's enough precedence in the market to say what the ideal Typespec model is, but this is working for us. We've got various things. We've got the different types of APIs. We've got a commons folder where we've put active and a historic currency and amount. We've got our error models that standardize the models across all our APIs. We're using JSON API, so we've got some models that help us with JSON API. So as you can see, well, you can be the judge of this, but it's clean, it's logical, we've got a clear degree of separation. All of this stuff still ends up in an OpenAPI document that we can publish and everybody can take and use as a template for implementing their APIs. So we reduce cognitive load, and we get a good sense of what our package structure is. Going back to active currency and active or historic currency in amount, I think this is a feature of financial services APIs and schemas. They always give you long names to refer to things in. Our old friend has become this. This is clean, standardized, and what's more, I can use it anywhere, just pick it up and use it without poor active or historic currency and amount being copy and pasted again. So they're happy. Whenever we emit a new version, remember from Kaylin's talk, the emitter step, whenever we emit a new version, we always get this same thing every single time. This is the thing I really, really like. When in our old tool chain, we'd create separate versions of the YAML files. We'd publish those separate versions. And whilst that was fine and workable, it felt wrong. And the reason it felt wrong is because we're consistently creating this kind of static document in one place that when we changed it, it was always something new. And our versioning history in GitHub was more difficult to manage, and it felt a little bit wrong. One of the things that Typespec does nicely is it adds version decorators. So you can add a field in and then stamp it with a version. So at the top here, I've got an enumeration of my available versions, and down here I can say where I've added and deleted them. Now you may be thinking, oh, versioning APIs, what a load of rubbish. Surely you don't want to do that. Well, when you're a standards author, you need to create versions so it's clear when people are taking that template and implementing it, what's changed and when. So it's really, really important to have a draft clearly stamped or a release candidate. So having that available is really, really good and makes our lives much easier. Plus, we can manage the versions all in the same place. So really, really good for consistently authoring our standards in one way. There's a few things, though, that are on the naughty list for Typespec, in my view, and this is where the ecosystem will need to develop a little bit, and with time, as this burgeoning ecosystem develops, they'll be fixed or there'll be a way to do it. The first thing is security schemes. There's the decorator is called add auth in Typespec. I've tried to use this in order to implement standard auth flow objects. It doesn't quite work very well. It doesn't give me enough context in terms of the implementation of the security objects that pops out when the OpenAPI description is emitted. So it's a bit painful, but I've overcome this. I'm using a thing called overlay. This is a new specification from OpenAPI that allows you to deterministically update your OpenAPI documents. So I can do my Typespec emit operation, get my OpenAPI, and then just consistently and deterministically put the right pieces on top of that that make my OpenAPI description complete. So I use this overlay thing. There's a few vendors that support it now. It's about to go to version 1. I've written my own because I like writing things. So additional properties, you cannot set it to false. So if you know OpenAPI, you'll know that additional properties is a keyword that says you can either have more properties in your JSON, you can have properties in your JSON that are shaped like this and provide a schema object, or you can have no extra properties in your JSON. Additional properties is false is about the most consistent thing you'll find across API standards for Open Finance, because nobody wants more data when they don't ask for it or it's not consented to. Consent with the end user is at the end of everything. So you'll find this thing in probably most open banking standards. So I couldn't work out how to do this with Typespec. I ended up using overlay again. Basic theme of my toolchain is that overlay helps me do the things I haven't discovered, don't know how to do, and it might be my ignorance because I'm new to it as well. But it definitely helps me just to get the shape of my API just right when I emit the open API description. I've ended up with a load of orphaned, well, not a load, but some orphaned objects, and I can't work out why they're orphaned. Again, overlay helps me here. At the moment, they're in my overlay document. It says remove object with this JSON path. Get rid of that thing. In time, I will use Spectral, and you'll see my toolchain in a minute. I'll use Spectral in order to just do it automatically to identify the object and then remove it. And just the last thing, which perturbs me somewhat, but I'm just kind of like, I'll have to solve that later, is that in my responses object, I've got every response laid out in line every single time with a reference object to the schema object that sits underneath it. I cannot for the life of me get response objects to render as references rather than being declared in line. This is a minor pain for me. It makes my output OpenAPI document more verbose than it needs to, but at the moment it's still a feature complete OpenAPI description. I kind of shrug my shoulders and get on with it. So it wouldn't be a presentation with some slop from AI. So there's my tool chain. So next steps for us as Ozone, as the team writing standards and evolving our use of Typespec. We need to convert all the open finance standards that we deal with and get them into Typespec. Caelan's already pointed out that that's on the roadmap inside the ecosystem. We've actually created the semblance of our own, which is just about to be finished. We're going to package up as much as we can a canonical model so that we've got a good representation of where there's commonalities between different ecosystems, because at the moment, you know, every market does their own thing. We're not necessarily the standards authors, but these objects are the same. You know, if you remove the description and stick them through an object hash, you'd probably find out that they're exactly the same. So we're going to look to build a more canonical model that then simplifies both how we go and create new standards, but also simplifies how we build our system as well, because at the end of the day, we're building a platform to help implement open finance APIs. And then that obviously leads on to being able to reuse objects better. So our toolchain looks like this. On the left is market requirements. We always start with market requirements. I've been told to stop, so I've got to go quick. The next thing we do is we create standards. Visual Studio Code is how we author Typespec. We use our models, the Typespec compiler, and then our OpenAPI to Typespec converter is called OATS, the OATS CLI. We're emitting two things. We're building an emitter for TypeScript, so we can start with Typespec and emit TypeScript natively. And then on the other end, we use OpenAPI as our primary output. When we emit that, then we get our OpenAPI document that we're going to publish. We use overlay to update it in the ways I described. And then we use Spectral to lint the thing to make sure we haven't messed up in any of those steps. That is the end. Thanks very much.